which is not too far from Los Angeles. Rented a trailer, lived in a trailer park. My dad, who was a butcher, went to get a job, and they wouldn't hire him, and he says, listen, I'll work for you 2 weeks free of pay, and then if you don't want to hire me, that's fine. He worked 2 weeks without pay, and I hired him. And he came home that night with a bottle of champagne, I remember. And we spent 9 months there. I went to school there, and well, am I supposed to tell everything personal too? I mean, this is the one thing that I remember. I had lice.
Oh.
You know, in those days it was pretty normal. And my mother had cut my hair short like a boy haircut. And I remember going to school how embarrassed I was because of that. But soon after that, you know, the problem was taken care of. But we were there 9 months, and my mother was very, very homesick. And my father wanted to stay, but she didn't, so we came back to Erie. We came back, everything was gone. All of my grandmother, whose home we had lived in at 1611 Plum Street, it was a 4 apartment building. She had sold everything that was in the house, so we came back to nothing. So we ended up staying in a room. It was around Christmas time at the Wayne Hotel, which was on Upper State Street there, on between Peach and State. I remember being in this little hotel room, and it was Christmas time. My mother had hid my Christmas presents in the closet. So it was one of the times where I started to think, well, is there really a Santa Claus? But at any rate, we ended up, from there we went to my grandmother's house and stayed upstairs for a while, and then we moved next door. She owned a building next door, and we stayed there until we ended up on 26th and Pittsburgh Avenue, where my father, 27th and Elmwood. We lived in a converted garage, with a dirt floor, and I was, by this time, I was around 9, 10 years old. And then from there, we moved to 26 and lived in a trailer behind a gas station right where the Tops Market is today in Erie. And we lived there a short time, and then my father, who always wanted to be in business, ended up buying a piece of land on 26 and Pittsburgh Avenue, where he built a fruit stand to start. He was open 7 days a week from 8 till midnight. And in those days, you didn't stay open on Sunday because there was a blue law, which said you couldn't, but he did. Ended up building a general store, which I was there from probably 11 years old till I got married at 21. That's where we lived. And that's
okay.
the basis
Let me step back.
Sure.
So your father has multi-talents. I mean, he's working in the vegetable industry, but then also is a butcher.
Also a musician. He played in a band. I can't remember the band right now. I don't know if it's John Sousa. It was a local Erie band that was quite famous in Erie. Played the trumpet. Do you want me to go on?
Sure.
With my grandfather was a professor of music in Italy, and when he came here, he may have taught lessons. I'm not sure about that, but all of my dad's siblings played an instrument. You know, the violin, the organ, piano. He played the trumpet, and they were all singers, and they all sang in choirs at St. Paul's Church, Singers Club, Philharmonic. My father actually sang in the choir at St. Peter's Cathedral. And so music was in my life always. And we used to gather always at my grandmother's house at 1705 Liberty. It's now gone. There's a drugstore there.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school, grade school I went to St. Michael's. And then when we came back, I went to Blessed Sacrament. Then went to Roosevelt, and then Strong Vincent.
Was there a moment in your life, you're growing up in this Italian-American family, and I assume, you know, the ongoing Italian-American traditions and kind of cultural experiences. Was there a moment, though, that you realized you were Italian-American?
Yes, when I went to high school. When I lived on 16th and Plum, the Italians were from like 26 in 26th Street to 12th Street. You know, there's a big radius, as there was with German people, and the others on the east side. And on the west side, they were all Italians. And it wasn't until I went to Strong Vincent High School that I thought everybody was Catholic and Italian. And once I got there, you know, of course it was diversified. And yeah, there was a moment when I thought, gee, not everybody's Italian. Not everybody's Catholic, you know.
Did you ever feel tensions or any discrimination?
I didn't feel so much tension or discrimination at Strong Vincent as I felt they had more money. I knew that because they all belonged, their families belonged to the Cockle Club and different, you know, Lake Shore. But I didn't feel bad about it. Just, you know, you had your own group. I had my own group of Italian friends, actually, but we still were friends with the other, you know, the other group of kids.
And
It was a good growing up experience at Strong Vincent in those days.
So there was intermingling
Oh,
between
definitely.
the Italians and the Germans and the Poles?
Blacks, yeah. I
Mhm.
had good friends that were African American and Jewish, and yeah, to me there wasn't. My father was never that type of parent. He loved everyone. Yeah, my mother too. She was a good woman.
So there was no concern about when you were catching the eye of some German boy or whatever?
No, well, my mother was German.
Okay.
My father was Italian.
Okay, so that helps.
Yeah,
that
my
helps
mother was
establish that
German,
story.
yeah, right,
Okay.
right. No, there was never, the only time I came across that was when I was going with a young man, Dick Moorhead at Strong Vincent, and we had plans to be married, and he was going to join the Navy, because he was a year ahead of me, went to the house for dinner and was going to stay there the night to leave the next day to take him to the airport. His father was very much against the fact I was Catholic. He took me out on the porch, I remember, and put a Bible in my hand. And, you know, Catholics didn't really study the Bible, they did it in church. And they heard the Bible in church. And I was confused. I thought, why is he doing this? You know, it wasn't until a few years later that he was actually a Mason, who at the time were, you know, very much against Catholic faith. So that's when I had, you know, some problems with.
Is that what led to the problems in the relationship?
No. No. Well, here comes the part. Here comes the part. What happened is he joined the Navy, and he was in the Navy for 4 years, and during that time, he asked that we break up, and I think because of, you know, being in Japan, and he probably had the opportunity to be with another woman, or he didn't want to be unfaithful, so he said, let's just wait till I come back. Well, in the meantime, I had been very infatuated with a boy I met in 9th grade. In 12th grade, I married him instead. And when he did come back, he called me on the phone, and my mother said she's married, and that was the end of that. Yeah. His father very happy.
Let's go back
Okay.
to prior to your 11th year,
Okay.
Because that is kind of a turning point, it strikes me, in your story.
Yes.
You're 7, 8 years old,
Mhm.
and the war is starting.
Oh, I remember that well. Yes, the war started, and I remember we were at 16th and Plum, and I remember standing outside, and my uncle Gaylord Disbrow, my mother's brother who lived with us, he was there with his soon-to-be bride, and they were saying, "I'm joining the Army. I'm going to join." And within a week or so, he was gone, and he served a 20-year man in the Army then. And I remember all the papers, you know, Japan declares, I mean, we declare war in Japan, and yeah, I remember that like it was yesterday. And all the, you know, the rationing, my mother used to save grease in a can, take it to the local store, and for, I guess, I mean, nylons or something, but it also helped. No, I'm sorry. We ration nylons. We couldn't buy a pair of nylons, you know, and you gave up many things then, and you had the stamps for food, and sold war bonds. I remember being in the movie theater, and during intermission, that time they did 2 movies at a time, and in the intermission they sold war bonds or stamps, which you filled a book, and when it was filled you bought bonds. And yeah, I remember that, a lot of that, the movies.
You're growing up though in a family. Your mother is German,
Mhm.
your father's Italian,
Mhm.
and the United States is at war with the Germans and
Mhm.
Italians.
Yeah. You know what? I should go back again and tell you, my mother was German when my father, she wasn't Catholic. And when he married her, my grandmother was very upset. And she didn't talk to them for a year. It was only when I was born that they named her after me, or named me after her, Concetta, which, by the way, my nickname is Connie. They finally took her back into the family. And it was a sad time for her, you know, but eventually everything turned out okay. And my mother did eventually become Catholic too, so that made everybody happy too.
Do you recall anything unusual, because we're at war with Germany and Italy, that here you're in a family in which you're German and Italian heritage? Was that ever brought up, or there was, you know, any questioning about the war because you're...
No, I have to say no. My family was very kind and loving, and they were Italian, so they were very loud at dinner parties and stuff, but no, I don't ever remember any racism, no.
Why do you suppose your family moved so many times? I mean, you mentioned in the number of times
Well,
you bounced around.
Well, but we bounced around in Erie because my father didn't have much money when we came back from California, so he was a trash man also. He earned money that way. He worked on but that was another part of the war. WPA, when you couldn't find a job, the government put you to work. I think it was called workers. You familiar with it? Workers' pension or something.
The Works Progress Administration.
That's it, yeah. So I do remember that part, him working on the railroad. And like I said, eventually he did find a job as a butcher.
Now, are you the only child?
No, I have a sister. My sister Gloria, who's 7 years younger than I, and you know, she doesn't remember a whole lot because she was 7 years younger. But what I want, are you going to get into where my grandmother and grandfather talk about them?
Well, you can if you like.
Because I have a story about 16th in Plum Street, what happened with the Black Hands. At that time, that was the mafia. And when my grandfather first came over, they lived in the house I lived in later. And they had a macaroni factory or spaghetti factory in the basement of this home I lived in. I wasn't born yet, of course. And my aunts told me the story. First of all, the Black Hands would go to all the businessmen and they had to pay protection. You've heard that story over the years. And my grandfather refused to pay. And they ended up bombing his macaroni factory and put him out of business. So to me, that was a very sad time in my grandparents' life. And then there was before that happened, they tried to kidnap one of my aunts, my Aunt Josephine. They had her like out the window, you know, and they were screaming. The other daughters were screaming. They had 6 children, and of course they didn't do it because, you know, they heard the screams and saved her. But I mean, you know, it seems almost like history being repeated sometimes when you hear these stories. And my aunt, at one time, there's so much to tell. My grandmother on 17th and Liberty, where she lived later, after we moved into that apartment, we had family. My cousins lived upstairs, and then there were 2 other Italian families that lived there. But when they lived on 17th and Liberty, they had a little ice cream store, which was right in the corner. And do you remember? Are you familiar with Erie?
Well, I've only been in this area 15 years.
Oh,
so.
okay. All right, well, well, I wouldn't even go into that
Well,
part. But they
you
had,
explain it.
oh, well, they had an ice cream parlor. And my Aunt Josephine, who worked in there as a young woman, she was involved with a young man, and she broke it off, and he ended up coming into the store and committing suicide right there in the store. And that was a tragic time, too, in their lives. But I'm sorry, it was my Aunt Lucy. And at one time, no, later on, it was just about 20 years ago where they painted the side of that building on State Street across from the Warner Theater.
Mm-hmm.
She was the woman, an older woman then, she was in her 80s. They painted her holding an ice cream sundae because that was part of the history of Erie. And since then it's been painted over, which is too bad. But,
Well, let me ask, let's go back to the grandparents
Okay.
and the Black Hands.
okay.
Erie has a tight-knit community,
Mhm.
and in the Italian-American Little Italy, basically, for the most part, most people know each other, right?
Oh, yes,
So,
yeah.
and because the families stay, was there any kind of lingering, oh, we remember that family and those people because they were associated with that? Was there any kind of tensions within Little Italy because of that you stay away from that family because they're the ones who helped bomb
Oh,
grandpas,
no.
that kind of stuff? Was
No,
there?
I don't remember if they knew who they were. I don't remember any names being said. Because there again, I wasn't born yet. I just got the story per se, they didn't go into detail. And I'm so sorry I didn't ask more questions, because I would like to have known more. Yeah.
Now, so you're in what, 1945? Is that it? About when
Around there.
you hightail it out? Why so quick? Why so sudden? Was there something happening that prompted your dad to
My
leave?
father was an antsy kind of guy. When he was 16, he ran away to California. First of all, he was kicked out of every school in Erie. And he ended up going to prep, and they kicked him out of there. And he was really a nice guy, but he had that, like, he wanted to be something in life. So when he went to California, he went into that amateur boxing, and that's where he got the name Frisco, from DiFrancisco. And but that didn't work out, and eventually he came back to Erie. But he always wanted to go west. I want to go west, and that's why, he just picked up one day and they went west.
Okay.
That was it. But like I said, we came back.
Right. Well, and you graduate from high school, what, 1952?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you graduate in 52, and I've done a little research on the 1950s in Erie.
Uh-huh.
There were a number of allegations about the mafia in
Oh, yeah.
Little Italy.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Did you?
I married a man whose stepbrother was in the mafia, and still is to this day. But that's over and done with. He's old. He's in a nursing home. But yeah, I saw a lot of that in my in-laws' home. I had people coming in from Youngstown and Newcastle, but I was always like step back from it. It was like I was watching a movie when I'd be at this particular house. And in fact, that new movie that just came out, Kill the Irishman? They said they aren't going to show it in Erie. But it's a story about the mafia. Danny Green's his name. It's a movie. And you remember Ray Ferrito. He was the one, that ended, I don't know if you remember, but ended up killing this man who the movie is about now. And I can say this because the movie's out and they say his name and everything in the movie.
But was Ray Ferrito from here?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, very much, yeah. A lot of that going on in Erie in those days.
Well, but speak to me more about it. Like, I mean, what did you see? What did you know? And was there tension in the Italian American community about it? There are those who are participating in it. There
Yeah.
are those who are just zip your lips, and then there are
Yeah,
those who are
well,
saying that's not good.
I was the one that zipped the lip. I never talked about it outside of the family. Never. I just knew, And it wasn't just till the past few years that I realized, or heard, or know for sure that it was true. Because you always speculated, so, you always thought, and there were numbers, a lot of people in the Italian neighborhood did numbers, and it was against the law. My dad even did it at the store, but the particular person I'm talking about did go to jail like 3 times, for, not for murder or anything, but for some kind of crime that it was associated with gambling or stealing, that kind of thing.
Well, growing up and in high school, did you know kids that were kind of on that path and kids that were not on that path?
One, and there again, he was in, he happened to be a good friend of my first husband, and it was, am I to say names? Or?
You can if you want.
Oh, I really don't want to. He did end up going to jail. Yeah, he was a young man that, went astray. And but like I said, I always felt removed from it because that wasn't my style.
Mm-hmm. So,
but
go ahead.
No, if you want to ask me another question regarding it. Well, I just want to get into the Italian culture that we had that I hadn't mentioned about my grandmother. We celebrated St. Joseph's Day every March 19th. One of the reasons was, first of all, they were from Sicily, and it's a great tradition to celebrate St. Joseph's Day. Well, when my mother was carrying my grandmother was carrying my father, she fell down the cellar stairs. I'm sorry, let me back up. She was carrying him, well, she had him, he was 6 years old, I'm mixing this up with the other son. And he stayed home from school one day because he was sick. Well, they lived in the house on 16th Street where the macaroni factory was. And he was downstairs. Now there are huge gears, that ran the machines and stuff. Caught his hand in it, yes. And he cut off 2.5 fingers, and he just had this part and this finger. And she prayed to St. Joseph that he would be all right, because in those days there wasn't the medical knowledge we have today. And she prayed that if he lived, she would honor his day, St. Joseph's Day, every year. Well, he did live, and every year we had this huge celebration at her house at 17th and Liberty. She invited the whole city, and in one given day, 400 people would come through her house. Now, there were no paper plates or cups in those days. She had a huge china cabinet, probably almost the length of that, was filled with dishes. And people would come in. She had 19 orphans from St. Joseph's Orphans Home that sat at the main table. She had like 2 or 3 parlors, because it was a big house. And the whole house was filled with card tables, and people came and went the whole day. She prepared food 2 weeks before. And when you walked in her house, and that's where this book comes in, there was this huge, huge long table that was filled with foods, cookies and pies, and it was all meatless, no meat, eggplant, stuffed artichokes, stuffed mushrooms. It was just a beautiful affair. But the big thing was she honored St. Joseph, always had a huge picture of him above the table, and flowers, and everyone that came in got a piece of St. Joseph's bread that was blessed and an orange. And but food, she made big pans of pasta visual. Everybody got soup and whatever was on the table. And there were like probably 8 or 10 little old Italian ladies that were in the kitchen washing dishes, over and over again as all these 400 people went through the house. And it was just a beautiful affair. And my sister and I and my cousins have honored that even to this day. And it's not as elaborate, but we do have some kind of food on that day.
Well, we know that Italian American and Italian Catholics celebrate their faith in different ways than the Irish and the Germans.
Mhm.
And we've talked earlier in other interviews about the processions and other kind of
Oh,
ceremonies
yeah.
that are
Oh.
kind of uniquely Italian.
Yes.
Do you remember those?
Oh, yes, at St. Paul's Church. My grandmother was like one of the first, I think she's one of the founding members of St. Paul's. And I do remember them processing down on St. Joseph's Days with the big banners, and all of my aunts and uncles, my dad are up in the choir loft singing, and all of the novenas and the rosary nights and it was just beautiful. The pomp and circumstances that we had in that day are a true part of my Catholic faith, and my Italian heritage. And it's sad that we lost some of that today, and I'm hopeful that it will return someday.
Now, let's go a little bit forward and we'll
Uh-huh.
talk some more on
Okay.
other issues.
Mhm.
You graduate in 1952
Mhm.
and you get married in what year?
1955.
Okay.
Mhm.
And do you leave Little Italy?
No. Well, actually, we lived in the basement of the store, my dad's store, for like a year and a half. And then we moved and rented a home 2 doors from his mother's house on 16th Street, between here and Walnut. Just down the block from St. Paul's Church. And that's where I raised my 4 children, 3 girls and a son. And it was a wonderful time because, in those days, you could walk the streets at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and not worry. And there was only one group of kids that, well, they were called the Toddlebins, was their family name. And if anybody hurt you, you tell the Toddlebins, they'll take care of whoever hurt you. So I remember that very well. But no, I had, they were all Italians on the block, and their doors, I never locked my door on 16th Street, ever. And my neighbors, Lolly Corsi she'd make pancakes. She'd call everybody over, come on in and have pancakes. Whatever she made, or she made bread, she'd bring it over. My mother-in-law, people were always coming and going through her house. She never had less than 11 people at her dinner table. There was always someone at her dinner table. And they had people that lived there with, Jay Fatika and her husband lived there for a while because they were newly married. And it's just amazing, the generosity and the...
I'm puzzled because this organization is the Italian American Women's Association.
Yes.
I'm wondering why they don't call it the 16th and Walnut Club.
Oh, yeah, right.
Everyone who has been in so far
Uh-huh.
has at one point or another lived on or, a stone's throw from 16th and Walnut.
Yeah, yeah.
Describe the kind of the kind of street in terms of what was there,
Well,
and the businesses,
okay.
and the activity out there, because
Yeah.
we don't have it today. We were, I think, prior to the 50s,
Uh-huh.
prior to the 60s,
Uh-huh.
we were much more kind of out in the street and engaged with our neighbors than we
Right.
are today.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of the houses, when they were built, there was a house with a yard, and then the next one was a house with a yard next to the house on the others. It was not like 4 houses in a row. It was a house, a yard, and then a yard, a house. A yard, a house, and in that yard was a huge garden. I mean, everybody had a garden. We ate from the garden all year long because, they canned, and the streets were very narrow. And, but you could walk down that street and talk to your neighbors. They'd be on the porch, they'd be at the local, there's a corner store. There's like a corner store almost on every block in those days. There were no real big supermarkets. And it was just a wonderful, in hindsight now, it was a wonderful, wonderful taste of humanity. I mean, everybody was so caring, and they all had a great faith, and I think that was a big part of the culture too.
Mhm.
They
Now,
lived their faith.
Was this the kind of neighborhood where on a regular basis, you went to the butcher, the baker, the
Oh,
veg-
yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
the
do you
baker,
remember,
right
and do you
on the
remember
corner.
the names of those businesses and the people
Oh,
who
yeah.
ran them and?
Corellis was the corner store, and then there was Majestic Bakery. I'd go every day, walk down from my house for a fresh loaf of bread for the supper that night. You can't beat that. And what else was there? Oh, Dr. Leone, local physician. His house was right on 17th and Liberty. And the doctors, they came to your house when you had a problem. I remember having measles and the doctor coming to the house. And it was just a whole different world.
Was there, every neighborhood has, an old woman that you stay away from because she's cranky,
Well, there was a woman, we called her Mama Mooch, that walked down with a babushka on her head every day, and always in the middle of summer she'd have on a heavy coat. And she was kind of scary, but she wasn't really any problem, but just that she was odd or different.
Now, was she Russian or was she Italian?
No, she was Italian. We called her Mama Mooch. Yeah, she must have been in those days, probably 60, 70, but in those days, 60, 70 was old, really old. And, but I can't think of anybody else that, as I picture the streets, that I was afraid of.
Okay.
No. There was some cranky old Italian, well, my father-in-law, they called him the Gestapo because he was mean. He came from the old country. He was he was a rockapilla, and they're known for that hard head.
Explain that.
Well,
You guys may know it, but we don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to say this. He did have a tragedy in his life. His son died at 21 when he had tuberculosis, which in those days they had no cure for. And he died, and he lost all of his faith. He became a non-Christian. And he came through in his personality. If he was bad before, he was worse now. And I have to explain, he wasn't my mother-in-law's first husband, he was the second one. My first husband's father died when he was 9 days old. The tractor turned over on him. And so the second marriage was arranged. And in those days they did that too, And he was just mean. I mean, you couldn't have a nice conversation with him. He was like, bring her the food, that's it, He was like, well, I can picture, on Raymond, the show Raymond, the dad, how he's always that way with Marie, food, only not in a funny way, a scary way.
Yeah.
I was afraid of him.
Let me ask you this. In the 50s and then in the early 60s, you're a young person, still in Erie at this point, I assume, and we're starting to see the emergence of Italian politicians in terms of assuming, high positions. We have Canavino and Tullio. Thoughts about the emergence of these people from your own community?
Well, it was exciting for the Italian community to have somebody in a little more prestigious position. And Canavino, I remember was, everybody knew him. He was a really nice guy. And I can't remember everything that went on, but I do remember that, yes, it was a good thing, yeah.
Were there special expectations that,
Well, that they would help the Italian,
Yeah.
Sure.
And did you see that?
Well, see, I was in when Tullio was there, I think it was in my 30s, 40s, and I was busy raising a family, and I did see him at certain affairs, because my husband did work for the school district, and he knew him, on a pretty good basis, but I wasn't that much into it. I was busy at home raising the babies, the kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Over that same period,
Mhm.
as we were entering into the 60s, and then especially into the 70s, we're starting to see Little Italy change.
Yeah.
You want to speak to that?
Very sad. Very sad, because First of all, they didn't take care of their homes, their yards, you know, there were no more gardens. I mean, even the house I lived in, I mean, I must say one thing about the Italians, they're immaculate, you know, from the old country. They cleaned and they cooked, that was their life. And, but when I go back now, I'm brought to tears because this may be the moment. The house I lived in, I had beautiful grass, flowers, and I mean, it's rented now, you know, but it's a shambles, it's a shack. It's sad, you know.
Why did the Italian American community let it?
Well, the Italians moved. I mean, they just moved to, you know, 26th Street and 32nd Street and now 38th, and they're up in Mill Creek in Fairview. And it's like any metropolis, what happens, you know, the less fortunate or the impoverished, they move a little closer in, and I think what happens, it's like a circle, that eventually the place they move from eventually gets built up again, and then they'll all be up here, and then we go back to,
Right.
you know.
When you, I mean, is Little Italy still Little Italy?
Yes, it is, because the people, and you know, just at Mass, a funeral Mass I went to there at St. Paul's last week, the priest said, you know, people tell me that still come from the old days back to the church, they said, oh, Father, the neighborhood's changed so much. You know, we remember walking down the street, that's the other thing I wanted to say, on Sunday, there was sauce. I mean, the whole neighborhood was sauce, the smell, the aroma. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere on 17th, 18th, 16th Street that you didn't smell the sauce on Sunday. It was a beautiful, beautiful time. And that's not there anymore. But the Father says, you know, nothing's changed. He says the only thing that's changed is the people are different. It's still the same neighborhood, still the same houses, still the same streets. But the feeling is still there when you go down, like to the festivals. People that come to the St. Paul's festivals aren't all from the neighborhood. There's people that come from all over the city because it's their roots, you know, it's their life. You know, I'll never lose that. I was baptized at St. Paul's, and I wasn't married there, but still, I have so many memories, you know, of the church itself and the neighborhood, yeah.
Was there a point where you kind of struggled with your own Italianness, that you kind of perhaps didn't embrace it or appreciate the Italian heritage?
I've always been proud to be Italian. Never, ever embraced any other feeling. No.
What do you do to keep the Italian traditions alive with your children and so forth?
Well, we do this, we have spaghetti, you know, they've all learned to cook Italian. I still cook it, that's what I do, is I cook Italian, and they all are good, they all go to church, and they celebrate St. Joseph's Day, you know, even if, like, I have a daughter that lives out of town, you know, she'll, even if it's a simple dish of pasta visual and eggplant, she'll have it that day. And no, they all love their Italian heritage.
Is there anything beyond faith and food that identifies the Italian heritage that you've handed down to your children? Do you remember any songs or?
Family. Oh yeah, my dad used to sing a lot of Italian songs, and he ended up with Alzheimer's, but he was still singing Italian. Yeah, on his bed in the hospital, he's singing the da 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 da. You know.
Do you know any of the songs? Do you remember any of the songs?
Oh, I know.
I guess what I'm asking is, would you sing anything?
I don't, you know, it's way Marie, da 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 da. That's, but if someone else is singing it with me, I can almost catch the words and I can sing it, yeah. But it's a wonderful thing. if I have time to tell you a quick story, my nephew just got married in Washington, D.C. All the family went up, and her family is English or something. So the Italians are on this side of the room. They're on this side of the room. Well, the little band that played were fantastic. And they played a couple Italian songs. That's Amore. Well, this side of the room is standing up and dancing and singing the songs, and and they're over there just looking like this. And, I mean, it's just that kind of warmth and love that I love about being Italian.
Well, since you mentioned marriage,
Yes.
are there particular customs, marriage customs, that are unique to the Italian community?
Well, there was. I don't know if it is so much anymore, but they always had the little wedding candies. Do you remember what they're called? The wedding candies? I just said it. But they're like almonds covered with a hard crushed shell, and they're different colors, pink and blue and white. Those were always at the Italian weddings. And when you go into the weddings years ago, they'd have a shot glass and whiskey or whatever, and you'd have to take a shot when you walked in the door. I did it once, but I never did it again. No, but that was their tradition, and in those days, they didn't have big dinners or anything. They had a reception. You had sandwiches and champagne and the cake. That was it. And it just, evolved over the years.
In my family, my heritage,
Mhm.
they would walk around the community, the neighborhood with a walking stick, and then people would tie dollar bills or whatever onto the stick to give to the newlyweds.
Okay, they did that with the bride. When she danced, the bride's dance, the father would dance and the husband, and then you'd go up and in order to dance with her, you'd pin dollar bills on her dress. Yeah, they definitely did that. Yeah.
Did that happen to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. It was fun. Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah, and in my reception, I had the sandwiches, too. They carried around baskets and passed them out. It was so much simpler. And, of course, in those days, too, you had a big wedding breakfast before you even went to church. You had breakfast, and then you had the church, and then the reception. And a lot of times, like my husband wore long tails, and they changed and they wore a regular tux when he went to the reception. So even that was different. Yeah. And see, I can't remember so much. I'm trying to think of the traditions. Well, the garter thing, that was always there.
Sure. We have 15 minutes left.
Okay.
And because I want to make sure we get to take a look at your book and look at that, I want to ask, help me with some questions. Are there questions that you want to ask that I should ask? Are there things that you're thinking, oh, I should tell him that, or I wonder if he doesn't want to hear this, but tell me anything that you find interesting.
Before we get off the subject of weddings, what about when did the cookies become such a part of an Italian?
That's definitely,
Yeah.
the cookies. I mean, in fact, I tell you a cute story about when my grandson got married in Atlanta. There's way different traditions there, So it was this big, beautiful room, and my daughter had asked everyone in the family to make cookies. We even went early, like a week before, make cookies. Cucci Dadi and knots and sesame seed and pizzelles. So anyhow, we bring all the cookies, and she asks the waiters and waiters to please set them up at this particular table. Well, when we start coming in, we all start going to the cookie table, and everybody's taking cookies, and the waiter runs over to my daughter and says, "They're eating all the cookies, they're eating all the cookies." They thought they were supposed to be used for dessert. In the Italian tradition, that's what you do when you come in. You have cookies before you eat your main meal, So I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah. So, but that is a big part. We still do that to this day.
Even back then when
Yeah.
they didn't do the big meals, they did the sandwiches. Did
Right,
you always have
sandwiches
cookies
and the
too?
cookies, yes,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah, cookies and a big cake,
Okay.
big cake.
Other questions?
No,
Yeah.
no, go ahead. She's got
Is
a
it-
lot of stories.
Any other stories that you can think of in the Italian American
In the
community or
Italian,
in your
yeah.
family?
Um,
Anything you need to confess?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I've done that many times. But, well, you know, I love the Catholic. Well, that is not Italian, but I think it is really intricately involved in Catholic. And not every Catholic's Italian, but I think most Italians are Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the part of my heritage that I love so much, and I hopefully have conveyed to my children, whom I'm very blessed to have had. Children have grown up to be good people, and I just love the church itself, the Mass, and now they're bringing in the Bible into the Catholic Church, which is wonderful. We're doing Bible classes and things like that. And but as far as the Italian heritage, I remember to this day people that I lived next door to, the DeBellos, the Barillos, the D'Onofrios, my godfather, one of my dear friends, Vincent Donatuzzi, lived across the street. And to this day, you know, when I bump into people, my husband always goes nuts because he's German. Oh, now do you remember so-and-so? Oh, yeah, that was my husband. That was my father's uncle. Yeah, they lived on 16th Street. Oh, no, they owned a grocery store. You know, you'll go on for like 5-10 minutes, and he just stands there and goes, oh, no, not again. But that's what I love, too, about the Italian heritage.
So you were at St. Paul's, right?
I was at St. Paul's Church for a short time. That when we went to California and came back, then I ended up at Blessed Sacrament.
Okay. Now, were the priests in these parishes Italian?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Well, I don't know if they ever told a story about Father, oh, geez, I can't believe it. Marino, Father Marino. He was like the cornerstone of St. Paul's Church. And his home was right next door to the church at that time. It was not the church it is today. But it caught on fire, I remember that. And he was burned very badly, the whole side of his face. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do remember that story very well. And but he was with the parish for many, many years as pastor. And
I know in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, they were ethnic parishes. So you had the Irish Catholic Church and the Italian Catholic Church.
Yeah, this was.
But I didn't always know if the priest was necessarily Italian himself.
He definitely was. Yes. Most of the priests thereafter, I think, were Italian in that parish. And one other thing I didn't mention was the Nova Aurora Club. That was the Italian club, much like the Segenbergers is to the Germans. And that was a great place. They used to bring in, stars from Jerry Vale, and there were a couple of really well-known stars that used to come in, sing, and entertain them. But the one thing that I remember most of all is fish balls that they served from the kitchen. Fish balls, pepperoni balls, but just that's where most of the Italian couples would go on a Saturday night, is the Nova Aurora Club. Yeah, that was a great.
Which is adjacent to the church.
And then the Kelly Club, which is gone now. The Kelly Club was over on the across the street, on the other corner, and that was a wonderful place too. It was very much like the Nova Aurora. Yeah, the Italian clubs.
I always close with this question, and I've done 50 plus interviews with the Sisters of St. Joseph. And I work closely with them, and at the end of those interviews, I asked them to look at the camera to give a message to the Sisters of St. Joseph in the future. And so I'm going to ask that you look at the camera and to give a message to the people and the spirit of Little Italy in the future. What would you say to
the sisters?
To the Italian American community of Little Italy in Erie, Pennsylvania? What would you say to them if you had anything?
I would say just hold on to your history, hold on to your culture, to your values, to everything that you hold dear in your family. and always teach what I have to bring God into this. Just trust in the Lord always, and He will direct your path.
Very good.
Mm.
All right, so now we're going to take a break, and you can keep the camera on. Let's go ahead and take a look at the book.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to ask that Raphael bring the camera over. And so if you want to show anything or point something out, please do so. And by the way, are you in this book?
My family is.
Okay, so we'll also take a look at that here.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Just to make sure we filmed it, and we have actually digitized all the photos there.
Oh, okay.
But then if anyone wants to do a documentary, we know what photo to explicitly go to. So
Okay,
what do
good.
you have there that you
Well,
want to?
well, I just, first of all, they always had a cake on the table that said, pray for us, St. Joseph. And then this is really an elaborate affair, and this is really the biggest table I've ever seen. Usually it's a whole table like this, but there's so much in here. There's so many different tables, and it's always has a statue of St. Joseph, candles, and a prayer petition, which you're asked to give a donation, and then it's given to the poor, that donation. Yeah. Many beautiful, beautiful tables in here.
Now, is there any, special kind of rite or process? I mean, you lay out the table, you have the statue, but is there anything that's special that's said or?
Well, we always had 2 or 3 priests that came and blessed the food
Okay.
before we ate.
But I'm Catholic, but and I
Yeah.
should probably know this. Is there a prayer to St. Joseph that you recite?
Oh, yeah, there is a prayer. And, but, you know what, he's considered the patron of the Universal Church, St. Joseph. And also a patron saint of having a happy death. Well, here it tells right here. Joseph, the earthly father of Christ and husband of Mary, keeps under his beneficent watch fathers and families, workers and craftsmen, immigrants and travelers. The humble carpenter of Nazareth aids and protects expectant mothers and doubting souls. He is the champion of social justice and the guardian of a happy death. He holds the exalted position of patron of the Universal Church. And that's it.
No, so what kind of things do you put on the table? To this day, what do you serve on these?
Always pizzelles and cookies, eggplant, stuffed artichokes, pasta visual, and there's a pudding cake that's chocolate cake and pudding turned upside down. There's always a favorite. And just all kind of green frittades, green beans, anything but meat.
Every
fish.
culture has cuisine, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not be good cuisine, like the English. I mean, I'm not sure the English have cooked anything decently. But the Italians love their food.
Oh, yes.
Why?
Oh, it's the garlic and the oil and the cheese. That's all you need to make good Italian food. Just garlic, oil, and cheese, and hot pepper. And everything will taste good, right?
Tomato.
Tomatoes too, yeah. Greens, pasta.
Yeah, but you stole the tomatoes from the New World.
That's true, but we made it our own. Yeah. Yeah. Italian food. My favorite is eggplant, melon jug.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I could live on that.
Very good.
Put me on a desert island, I could live on that. Yeah.
Well, I make my own eggplant lasagna.
Oh, sounds wonderful,
And
yes.
instead of using a marinara, I use an Alfredo sauce
Oh,
and hot sauce, so it's
wow.
very spicy.
I'll bet it's good.
I'll trade you mine for some of yours.
Oh, okay.
I'm making deals with everyone who
Oh,
comes
okay.
in. Did you notice that? I don't have an ounce of Italian blood, but I love the food.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
very good. Well, that
Okay.
wasn't
Are we
too
done?
painful. Is there anything
No.
else you want to say? You want to tell us? Again, I'm giving you the last chance to confess.
Oh.
Yeah, the statute of limitations has
Well,
run out,
this
so
is what I
you
wanna
can't
say.
be arrested.
Is this going into the archives?
It is.
Well, you know what? If my great-grandchildren or my great-great-grandchildren ever see this, I want you to know that I love you, and I am watching over you and praying for you always. Amen. Amen. Yes.